He had an app that lived like a secret between breaths. A small icon on his cracked screen that he never opened when anyone was around. A simple dark square with a white logo that looked like a coin folding into shadow. Nothing about it screamed danger, only the patient hush of something that had been there too long, and the way my friend, Samir, would slide his thumb over the glass and smile, as if he were remembering something private, made me think of lovers and late-night promises rather than the machinery of the dark places of the web. He told everyone the app was a promotion wallet, that brands paid him in Bitcoin for sharing links, that it was a hobby pocket where stray sats collected like lint in a jeans pocket, and when I asked, half joking and half curious, why he never cashed out, he would say with a conspiratorial wink, "Promotions stack up if you let them sit. It's passive like rent." And the truth fit him the way a favored hoodie fits. Comforting, easy, plausible. For months it was background to our lives. The occasional screenshot on his stories of a rounded number that rose an extra decimal point overnight, the casual flexing in group chats, the quiet pride when someone asked if he'd finally bought the camera or the motorcycle he'd been saving for. He said he didn't trade because trading was for gamblers and sleepless nights, not for the slow accumulation of something you hardly touched, and I believed him because our town believed in hustle and small lies that made life softer. Then one night I was at his place. Pizza boxes, a movie with the volume low, the rain making blunt little nails against the window, and he dozed off on the couch the way people who trust their homes will do, head lolling, mouth open, a little, breath staggered, and even. His phone was on the coffee table, face down, thumbprint pixel smeared across the aluminum. I have bad manners when I'm nosy. I picked it up. Curiosity is an animal I try to keep leashed, but sometimes it slips its collar and runs. The screen lit with a password prompt and the memory of his face. Asleep, made me press his cheek against the pad and hope my fingers matched. They didn't. Then I remembered the little thing he always did. An old habit of leaning on his thumbprint so notifications popped without unlocking. And I used the other side of my palm, the one that always smells faintly of cigarette smoke, and the phone side open as if relieved, and the lock screen revealed a muted notification. Hold. Incoming transfer pending, 3 confirmations required. My heart did something that felt like a dropped coin. The app icon glowed on the home screen, and my finger, traitorous, tapped it. It opened to a home of black and amber fonts, little ridged graphs like veins, and a balance that was suddenly obscene in its calm. A number of bitcoins, enough to buy a small house where his mother lived, enough to have changed the map of his life overnight. I scrolled because the phone felt like a borrowed life and because the curiosity parrot nested in my chest wouldn't stop. There were addresses, long strings of letters and numbers that looked like the spine of a hospital patient chart. There were labels faintly typed in his slanted script, Promo 1, Promo 2, Savings Mum, and then a tab I hadn't expected, Dark Services. I tapped, and for a second the app felt like a stage curtain lifting on a theater of midnight. Screenshots of marketplaces with names that tasted of rust, user handles that were anonymous and polite, listings like data packets, privacy nodes, undelivered favors, and one link that pulsed, the pulsing red of a heartbeat gone wrong, labeled Custody and Transfer Service Manual. My rational brain made every reasonable explanation sound like a paper boat. Maybe he was freelancing in moderation for a startup I didn't know about. Maybe this was a test wallet that somebody had sent a demo payment to, maybe all plausible and boring. But the tab opened to a ledger of outgoing transfers, timestamps like nails, and one entry that said, in clean type, commit-0.5 BTC, September 20th, 2025, 2:14 Greenwich Mean Time TXID. Hidden status. Pending release conditional upon confirmation of receipt. The phone hummed in my palm as if it were a living thing waiting for permission to do something irrevocable. I clicked where it said details, and there was a note in the memo field that was not machine-made. It was a short sentence in his own clumsy diction, for when they come, and beneath it a list of names. My chest felt suddenly too small for all the air. Who were they? I scrolled further and found a breadcrumb of messages tunneled into the app's interface. Small encrypted blobs that the app neatly labeled with the times they'd been received. Opening one required a key. I didn't know the key, but there was a pattern in his phone. He used his mother's birthday as a decoy password for everything sentimental. I typed the numbers, and the encrypted message cracked like an egg. It read, confirm after extraction. Confirmed. Will hold until client's contact gone. Use release code 77. And that was all. The letters looked like a riddle, the kind that blooms into dread the longer you stare. I locked the phone under my hand because I could not let him wake to find me intruding into the place where his secrecy lived. I sat there until the rain reduced itself to a gray whisper, and when he stirred and asked why I had his palm print on my hand, I laughed and said I'd been checking the time. He shrugged that way people shrug with their whole bodies when a thing matters and doesn't matter at once. And for the next few days I watched him in a new light, eyes dragging over the windows of his face like a searchlight testing glass. He continued with his small life of jokes and borrowed shirts and promises of future rides. But at night he sometimes left the room for a length of time and returned smelling faintly of chemicals. IPA? Acetone? The smell of something cleaned too hard. He would leave the phone face down, and sometimes I could see the reflection of an anonymous chat room on the black glass in the dim light, like a buried constellation. A week later, Samir's mother called me in a voice that sounded like the weather outside on a winter morning. Flat and full of a certain unnameable chill, and said he wasn't sleeping, that he'd been waking at odd hours and whispering to himself. He keeps saying they are watching, she said, and her voice folded into a sigh the way a page folds at the corner. I went over that night with a thermos of tea and the apologetic cheerfulness of someone trying to hold together the map of a life that was unfolding in a new geography. He tried to laugh it off. He said he'd been reading too many conspiracy threads, that the mind makes patterns out of shadows when you don't feed it light. But his eyes flicked to the app whenever he thought I wasn't looking, and once, when he thought I was asleep, he thumbed the screen and there was a chat I glimpsed before ducking. Something that said, "Drop-off confirmed. Awaiting release. Patient stable." I felt a coldness like a draft when you open a cupboard and find winter inside. I wanted to confront him, to demand a truth that would snap into place and be explainable again. A mistake, a joke, a misunderstood tech job. But the dark has a sticky quality. It renders fingers clumsy. Words like stepping stones that seem unsteady when you try to cross. I started to follow small things. The times he left the house, the number of people who appeared in his social feeds at odd hours, messages that came and went before he could respond. In the app, new labels appeared sometimes and then disappeared, as if a hand were quickly redacting notes from a ledger. The suspense built like an ocean on the shore. Slow, relentless, persuasive. One evening, coming back from a cigarette, I found the front door open and a note on the mat. "Don't come looking." It was the kind of note that is both warning and threat, and I told myself I would go inside, that I would find him safe and embarrassed by melodrama. Instead, the apartment was empty like a photograph with a blank in the middle where the subject had been cut out. His mother was at work. His clothes were still in the wardrobe, and on the table the phone lay face up, as if someone had meant to be dramatic and then had forgotten to stage the rest. The app sat on the screen, and there was a new line in the ledger. Release-0.5 BT, September 23, 2025, for 33 Greenwich Mean Time. My hands went numb, and I realized that for all the fear and the cinematic possibilities, I had not called the police, because for whatever reason our police are sloppy with the ephemeral. They treat shadow with the casual patience of men who have seen too many phantoms. I started my own clumsy investigation like a thief trying to learn sympathy. I logged into forums and read manuals of cryptocurrency custody, and because I am very human I also read the worst-case stories that made my bones ache. Extortion, forced transfer, the sale of people's private data to those who would do more than watch. In one forum, someone with a handle like Gray Archivist wrote, "If a wallet shows conditional release, it means a third party has put a hold. Those are escrow-like, but in the dark they are used to enforce." The sentence lodged in me like a splinter. I remembered the message on Samir's phone that said, "For when they come." Who were they but people who make lives into currency? A week of nights later, a man with the wrong kind of coat came to our neighborhood, and he had a collar like a question mark and shoes that whispered on wet asphalt. He asked about Samir without saying his name, and he nodded at me in a way that smelled like recognition and danger, like a wolf recognizing a mark puzzled enough to be interesting. He said he was looking for a courier, a young man who'd promised a drop, and my mouth moved before I could tell it to. "I've seen him tonight," I said, forcing my voice to be ordinary, and the man smiled, not cruelly, just with the polite patience of someone who collects favors. He left a card, blank except for a number and a single line, for questions. I didn't call the number. I put the card under the leg of a chair like an insect pinned for later study. Every time I thought I had an angle, the dark rearranged itself and left me with questions shaped like empty rooms. Then Samir called me. His voice was a rubber band about to snap. "Come over," he said. "Don't bring anybody. Lock your phone in your pocket." I thought of the man with the wrong coat and the card under the chair, and of the ledger entries on his phone and the way the rain had once made his apartment feel like a confessional booth. I went. He opened the door like a person opening a trap. He looked thinner in a way hunger will do to someone whose mind has been eating fear. He told me, in fits, that he'd been approached by people who had access to services, custody, extraction, protection. That required a kind of deposit. They promised security in exchange for a temporary hold. He had been told the funds would be safe until a contract was fulfilled. The logic sounded grooved and mechanical. People in a market require guarantees. Guarantees require collateral. Collateral requires escrow. But then he told me the part that made the room tilt. One of the conditions they'd asked for was proof. Proof that he'd deliver, and when he couldn't, they'd put a hold on his funds and say, until further notice, the client must provide satisfaction. And satisfaction, in the language of that world, had a price that was not counted in coins. He had refused. He said he would not do the thing they asked. "I thought they'd bluff," he said. And the way he said it held the sound of a man who had learned you cannot always call a bluff on those who traffic in people. "They took my wallet into their system. They said my funds would be safe if I kept quiet. They said they would release when they were ready." He looked at me, and the hunger in his eyes was a request. "I don't know who they are." That night we sat with the phone between us like a live animal and tried to map the edges of the threat. There were numbers in the app that corresponded to addresses, and sometimes when you clicked them they showed nothing but a status, the patience of a machine. We tried to trace the transactions. We found nodes and ledgers and the smell of anonymity. The more we tried to pull the curtain, the more the dark pushed back, as if it were lubricated to resist. In the middle of this terror, when dusk folded into a particular shade of blue only city nights know, Samir turned on his camera and recorded a shaky, raw video, voice breaking and telling a simple truth engraved with too much feeling. "If you love me," he said to the lens, "if you love me, tell your parents to subscribe to my channel and like the video. Tell them I am not a bad man." It was an odd plea that didn't fit the genre begging strangers' parents to subscribe, but he believed in simple things, in the arithmetic of attention, of human contact. He thought a flood of eyes would be a kind of proof, a human ledger that could be counted against cold, mechanical threats. The line sits in my head like a fossil. "If you love me, tell your parents to subscribe to the channel and like the video." It was a desperate charm, a superstition dressed as social media strategy. And yet, when we posted that video, when we let that fragile human broadcast into the dark corners of a network that eats light, something small happened. Comments, first like 100 and then 1,000 strangers' voices asking what had happened, people sharing the post with the steady devotion of those who enjoy the sensation of pulling at a loose thread. The world, for a second, flickered into color. But traction on the street of the internet doesn't always translate into safety. Some monsters like to be admired. The comments did not frighten them off. If anything, attention sharpened their appetite. In the days after the video, the men in wrong coats began to speak in tones that implied ownership. An envelope arrived at Samir's door with a single sentence inside: "Publicity does not equal discharge." The app registered outgoing traffic again, and the ledger sang with the same clinical calm it had shown before. I felt my life splintering around a central question. How much do you risk to rescue someone who, in their own carelessness, walked too close to a machine that eats people for parts? I started to see our town differently, as a map of surfaces where lives are thin and easily scavenged. He had the Bitcoin, they had leverage. He had refused to trade and had instead hoarded like a child saving marbles. And because he wasn't a trader, he hadn't protected himself the way people in markets do. He had left himself vulnerable to the very thing he thought would offer freedom. The narrative tightened, and we were in it like fish in the throat of a net. One night, a message appeared on his phone with a video attachment that made me sick. It showed a place I recognized as an old warehouse by the river, and a man in the video, someone I could not mistake. Walking slowly with a figure whose face was obscured, who was moving like a puppet whose strings had been jerked away. The caption said, "Proof of hold." It was a threat and a currency in one breath. Samir swore he'd never let them take anyone. He said they had taken something he loved, and that was leverage. "I will not let them hurt anyone," he said, and the ache in him was a blade. We planned, clumsy and brave, like men who have read too many vigilante novels and not enough courtroom manuals. We tried to appeal to reason, to law, to anyone who might help, and the world answered with the sluggishness of institutions that have decided to be bored with suffering. The dark had rules. It demanded payment, and it measured payment not only by coin but by humiliation and fear. The last night I saw Samir, he handed me his phone and told me to run. "If they come, run," he said simply. "If they ask you, say you never saw me. If they ask for the wallet, tell them it's empty." He smiled in a way that is terrible because it was brave. "If it helps, if you can, tell your parents to subscribe and like the video," he said, half laughing, half pleading, the absurdity of the plea brittle with irony and hope. I ran and I didn't run. I turned him in my mind like a coin to see where the face had gone, to see whether there was a seam I could pick. The next morning the apartment was gone the way a life can be when the earth takes it. Emptied, polished, as if someone had moved through with a gentle broom at night and swept the traces into a bag. There was a note in his handwriting on the table that said, "Forgive me," and under it a number of decimal places in Bitcoin and a line, "I did what I thought would keep you safe." Time moved differently after that, and the ledger on his phone became a fetish, an artifact I could not let go. People wrote to me in the months after to say they had seen the video and cried, to say they'd sent prayers, to say they'd subscribed and clicked like with the solemnity of those who feel powerless and want to do something that replicates action. In the ledger, the balance shrank, then grew, then disappeared, and the addresses folded like origami into other addresses, as if the money were being passed along a conveyor belt of hands. Sometimes I would get a message from an anonymous number with a single sentence, "Release next week." And sometimes, months later, another message, "Release canceled." The dark is patient. It keeps appointments and breaks them with equal cruelty. Now when I walk past the river at night, I think of the way coin glitters in the dark and why some people chase that light when they should be chasing the people who matter. Samir left behind a series of half-things. A camera he never learned to use properly, an old hoodie that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and a folder on a private server with logs I cannot read because I am not the kind of person who knows how to decrypt what the dark keeps. I made a promise to myself to tell his story the only way I can, by telling it in full and not letting the ledger be the only record. I tell it to confess my own cowardice and my own complicity in thinking secrets could be kept safely inside phones. I tell this not because I want pity but because sometimes the small acts of attention, the clicking of a button, the sharing of a story, the asking of a parent to subscribe and like a video, are all the light we have, and though light can be covetable and dangerous, it is also what breaks the spell when others gather around it and refuse to let a life be reduced to a transaction. If you have loved someone who disappeared into a number, if you keep wallets like promises in your pocket, be careful. There are markets for everything, even for the bleeding parts of us we think are private. And if you ever see an app that looks like a simple coin and promises slow fortune, remember that fortune harvested in the shade often takes a toll in daylight. Sometimes, it costs the things you cannot replace. I do not know where Samir is. I keep the videos we made together and the message he left about subscribing and liking and, absurdly, telling one's parents, because in that strange, gentle plea I hear a human asking to be remembered as more than a ledger entry. If the story reaches you and if you feel a tug, do the smallest thing. Tell someone you love that you love them, and if the impulse is social and silly and might help, go press a like or subscribe to a channel that shares truths, because attention is sometimes the only currency that buys a little more time.